My son, Deacon Tristan Ambrose, was a man of God, admired by our entire church. I trusted him with everything, even the tithe money I gave for the Lord every month. But when I gently questioned why my donations were never recorded, he used his sacred position at the pulpit to publicly denounce me as a lapsed sinner. He thought he could use God's house to hide his lies. He didn't know I had a different kind of faith. Faith in the undeniable truth held within my old bank statements. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Cecilia Ambrose, and for 72 years, my life has been built upon two unshakable pillars: my faith in the Lord and my boundless love for my son Tristan. After my dear husband Thomas was called home 10 years ago, those two pillars became my entire world. The New Hope AME Zion Church was my sanctuary, the place where my spirit found its solace, and Tristan, my only child, was the vessel into which I poured all my earthly hopes and dreams. To see him standing on the dais, a respected deacon at 40 years old, filled my heart with a pride so profound it often brought tears to my eyes. He was handsome in his Sunday suit, his voice smooth and confident as he read the scripture or led the morning prayer. He had his father's charisma, a natural charm that drew people in. The congregation adored him. "Sister Ambrose," the other church mothers would say, patting my hand, "you raised such a fine, godly man." I would just smile, my heart swelling, and thank the good Lord for blessing me with such a son. My life was a modest one, lived on my widow's pension and the small savings Thomas and I had carefully accumulated. But I never once failed in my duty to the church. My tithe, a tenth of my meager income, was the first bill I paid each month. It was a sacred covenant, a symbol of my gratitude for the blessings I did have. 4 years, as my arthritis made getting around more difficult, I had entrusted the physical act of delivering my tithe to Tristan. Every first Sunday I would place the cash, carefully counted and enclosed in a white offering envelope, into his hand. "This is for the church, son," I'd say. "Make sure it gets into the building fund plate." "Of course, Mama," he would always reply, his smile warm and reassuring. "You know I will." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was Deacon Ambrose, a man of God, my son. The first hint that something was amiss was so subtle I almost dismissed it as my own failing memory. Our church, like many, published a small acknowledgement in the weekly bulletin, a list of special offerings and donations made to specific funds. 4 years, a loving gift from Sister Cecilia Ambrose, would appear at least once a month. Then about a year ago it stopped. I noticed its absence, a small, quiet pang, but I chided myself. "They're busy, Cecilia," I thought. "The new secretary is probably just overwhelmed." I didn't want to make a fuss over something so trivial as public acknowledgement. My offering was to God, not for the praise of men. At the same time, I noticed a change in Tristan. He seemed strained. There were whispers about some bad investments he had made. His lifestyle, which had always been comfortable, suddenly became more lavish. He wore expensive new suits, sported a flashy new watch, and traded in his perfectly good car for a luxury model I knew was far beyond the means of a man with his modest salary. His wife, a sweet but somewhat naive young woman, seemed as dazzled by his new acquisitions as he was. When I gently inquire, he would wave it away with a confident smile. "Just some smart plays in the market, Mom. The Lord is blessing me. You taught me to have faith, remember?" He'd then change the subject, asking about my health or my garden. Still the unease lingered. I started noticing him being a little too eager for the first Sunday of the month, the day I gave him my tithe envelope. "Just want to make sure I get it to the church on time for you, Mom," he'd say. The financial requests, which had started as small, occasional loans to tide him over, became more frequent, more urgent. "Just until this new investment pays out, Mom," he'd promise. And I, loving him, trusting him, wanting to believe in the blessings he spoke of, would dip into my small savings, my heart aching with a worry I couldn't quite name. I tried to tell myself I was being a foolish, suspicious old woman. This was Tristan, my boy, a deacon in our church. The thought that he could be deceiving me, that he could be doing something untoward with the money I set aside for the Lord, was too monstrous to contemplate. It had to be my imagination, my old age anxiety getting the better of me. But the seed of doubt, once planted, began to grow, its roots coiling around my heart. The missing acknowledgments in the bulletin, his lavish spending, his constant need for more money, they were all small, disparate facts that, when viewed together, began to form a picture so ugly, so heartbreaking, that my soul recoiled from it. Yet I pushed it down. I chose to have faith not in the evidence of my own eyes, but in the son I had raised, in the man I so desperately wanted him to be. It was a choice that would lead to my deepest, most public humiliation. For several months, I lived with the gnawing uncertainty, my heart a battlefield where a mother's love warred with a creeping, terrible suspicion. I continued to give Tristan my tithe envelope on the first Sunday of each month, and each time the transaction felt heavier, more fraught with unspoken questions. I watched as his suits became more expensive, while the church's building fund thermometer, displayed prominently in the vestibule, remained stubbornly, disappointingly stagnant. My name never reappeared in the weekly bulletin. I prayed on it, rocking in my favorite armchair in the quiet of my small home, my Bible open on my lap, its familiar psalms offering little comfort. I asked for guidance, for a sign, for the strength to either trust my son completely or to face a truth I feared would shatter me. The answer that came to me was not a thunderclap, but a quiet, insistent whisper in my soul. Ask. The decision to approach him was agonizing. How do you ask your own son, a deacon of the church, if he has been stealing God's money from his own mother? The shame of the question itself felt like a sin. But the doubt was a cancer eating away at my peace, at the very foundation of my faith in him. I decided to do it gently, lovingly, not with accusation but with a mother's concern. I waited until the Saturday before the first Sunday of the next month. I'd invited him over for lunch, just the two of us, and had made his favorite, my slow-cooked oxtail stew. He seemed distracted, his eyes constantly flicking to his phone, but he ate with a good appetite. After the meal, as we sat with our cups of tea, I took a deep breath and plunged into the treacherous waters. Tristan, honey, I began, my voice softer than I intended. I was just looking over the church bulletins from the past few months. I haven't seen my little donations to the building fund mentioned, the ones you so kindly take for me. I offered him a small, hopeful smile. I just wanted to make sure you've been remembering to pass them along. With everything on your plate, I know how easy it can be for small things to slip one's mind. I had given him an out, a gentle path to a simple explanation. An oversight. A busy schedule. I waited, my heart pounding, for him to take it. But Tristan's face, which had been relaxed after the good meal, suddenly hardened. A cold, shuttered look came over his eyes, a look I had never seen before. Are you accusing me of something, mother? He asked, his voice low, a dangerous undercurrent in his tone. No, no, of course not, dear, I said quickly, my hands fluttering nervously. I was just worried the church might have misplaced them, or that you might have forgotten amidst all your important work. He stood up then, his chair scraping back harshly against my kitchen floor. I am a deacon of this church, he said, his voice now laced with an icy indignation. I do the Lord's work. To imply that I would be careless with an offering, especially my own mother's, is insulting. He looked down at me, his expression a mixture of contempt and a strange, calculating anger. Perhaps, he said slowly, the problem isn't with my memory, mother. Perhaps the problem is with yours. Or with your heart. Before I could respond, before I could even process the cruelty of his insinuation, he turned and left, the front door closing behind him with a sharp, definitive click that seemed to sever the very air between us. I was left there, stunned and shaking, his cold words hanging in the room like a toxic fog. The next morning, Sunday, I walked into church with a heavy heart. Tristan was already there on the dais, looking serene and pious in his deacon's vestments. He wouldn't meet my eye. I took my usual seat in the third pew, feeling a sense of foreboding so strong it was almost a physical presence. The service began. The hymns, which usually filled my spirit with joy, sounded distant and hollow. Then came the time for the deacon's announcements and testimony. Tristan stepped up to the pulpit, his familiar, charismatic smile fixed on his face as he looked out over the congregation. He spoke of faith, of duty, of the importance of giving. And then his gaze swept over the pews and for a fleeting, chilling moment, it locked with mine. Brothers and sisters, he began, his voice ringing with a false, sanctimonious sorrow, it is with a heavy heart that I must speak on a difficult matter today. Even among our most devoted, sometimes a spirit of worldliness can creep in. Sometimes even our elders, the pillars we look up to, can lose their way. Their hearts can harden. They can forget their covenants. A confused murmur rippled through the congregation. I felt my face begin to burn, my breath catching in my throat. I knew with a sickening certainty where this was going. "We must pray," Tristan continued, his eyes now fixed on a point just above my head. "A performance for the entire church. For those among us who have become lapsed sinners, who withhold their blessings from the house of the Lord while living in comfort. We must pray that their hearts are softened, that they remember their duties, that they return to the fold." He didn't use my name. He didn't have to. Every eye in that sanctuary, every member of the community I had been a part of for 50 years, slowly turned to look at me, Sister Cecilia Ambrose, the quiet, devout widow. Their faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning, whispered judgment. He had taken my private, gentle question and twisted it into a public spectacle of my own spiritual failure. He was discrediting me, shaming me, silencing me from the most sacred space in my life, all to cover his own wretched sins. The humiliation was absolute, a white-hot wave that threatened to consume me. He wasn't just a thief, he was a monster, one who would use the pulpit as a weapon against his own mother. In that moment, surrounded by the pitying and judgmental stares of my friends and neighbors, I felt a grief so profound it almost buckled me. But beneath the grief, a new foundation was being laid, one of cold, unshakable, righteous fury. He had used God's house to pronounce me a sinner. I would use it to reveal the truth. The walk home from church that Sunday was the longest of my life. Each step felt heavy as if my shoes were filled with lead. The familiar streets of my neighborhood seemed to mock me, the cheerful Sunday morning chatter of my neighbors a jarring counterpoint to the raging silence in my own soul. I could still feel their eyes on me, the whispers that had followed me out of the sanctuary like a swarm of angry bees. Sister Ambrose, a lapsed sinner? The woman who had organized the bake sales, taught Sunday school for 20 years, whose faith was as much a part of her as the air she breathed. It was unthinkable. And yet Tristan, my own son, had made it so. I closed the door to my small, quiet house, the silence within now a crushing weight. The plate of leftover oxtail stew from his visit the day before sat on the counter, a pathetic monument to my foolish, hopeful heart. I sank into my armchair, the one where I had rocked him as a baby, and the carefully constructed dam of my composure finally broke. The tears came hot and bitter, tears not of simple grief, but of a profound, soul-deep disillusionment. He had humiliated me in God's own house. He had used the pulpit, the sacred space of truth and grace, to weave a tapestry of lies, all to shield himself from a gentle question. He hadn't just stolen my tithe money. He had tried to steal my name, my reputation, my standing in the community that had been my bedrock since Thomas passed. He had tried to spiritually assassinate me. My faith for a terrifying moment wavered. Where was God in this? How could he allow such a desecration, such a perversion of his word, by a man wearing the mantle of a deacon? I felt a crisis of faith so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. The church, my sanctuary, now felt like the scene of a crime, a place of shame and judgment. For 2 days I did not leave my house. I did not answer the phone, which rang occasionally with the hesitant, curious calls of fellow church members. I sat in the dim light of my living room, the Bible on my lap, its pages a blur through my tears. I felt utterly alone, isolated by a lie so monstrous, so public I didn't know how to fight it. How could I, a simple old woman, challenge the word of Deacon Ambrose, the charismatic, respected church leader? But as the initial storm of pain and spiritual confusion began to subside, something else began to take its place. It was the quiet, stubborn resilience that had seen me through widowhood, through financial struggles, through a lifetime of quiet challenges. And it was anger. A deep, righteous anger that burned with a clean, clarifying flame. My son was a thief. And worse, he was a hypocrite of the highest order, wrapping his sins in the cloak of piety, using God's word as a weapon to silence his own mother. The anger didn't feel like a sin. It felt like a holy fire, a fire that began to burn away the fog of my despair. I thought of my late husband, Thomas. He had been a man of quiet but unshakable integrity. He despised hypocrisy. The loudest prayers often come from the most hollow hearts, Cecilia, he used to say. What would he have wanted me to do? To crumble? To let our son's lies stand? To allow him to continue to defile the sanctity of our church with his deceit? No. Thomas would have wanted me to fight. Not with rage and recrimination but with truth. My resolve, once shattered, began to reform, no longer soft and yielding like clay, but hard and sharp like tempered steel. I was not just a wronged mother. I was a steward of my husband's memory, a protector of my own good name, and a faithful member of a church whose integrity was being compromised by one of its own leaders. Tristan had underestimated me. He had seen my quiet faith as weakness, my gentle nature as an opportunity for exploitation. He thought a public shaming would be enough to silence me, to make me retreat in fear and shame. He had no idea that he had just awakened the sleeping lioness within the quiet church mother. I would not let his lies stand. But how to fight them? My word against his. In the court of public opinion, especially within the church he so skillfully manipulated, that was a losing battle. No, I needed more than words. I needed proof. Cold, hard, undeniable proof of his theft. Proof that would dismantle his pious facade and expose the rotten core beneath. The plan began to form not out of a desire for simple revenge, but out of a deep, burning need for truth and justice. It would be difficult. It would be painful. It would require me to take steps I had never imagined, to challenge the very structures of the community I held so dear. It would mean definitively, irrevocably, choosing the truth over the son I had loved so dearly, the son who was now to me a stranger. I rose from my armchair, my back a little straighter, my gaze clear for the first time in days. I went to my small writing desk and pulled out my old checkbook register, my bank statements, the small, neat notebooks where I had always, out of habit, jotted down my monthly expenses, including the cash withdrawals for my tithe. My son was a man of words, of eloquent, empty sermons. I, Cecilia Ambrose, would be a woman of facts, of figures, of irrefutable, documented truth. The battle for my soul and for the soul of my church had begun. And I, armed with a righteous fury and a lifetime of meticulous record-keeping, was ready. The first step in my quiet war against Tristan's lies was to build my fortress of facts. My kitchen table, once a place of shared meals and warm conversation, transformed into an investigative headquarters. I laid out my bank statements from the past 2 years, my old checkbook registers, and the small leather-bound notebooks where I meticulously tracked my monthly budget. It was a habit born of a lifetime of careful living, a discipline Thomas and I had shared. Now it was to become my arsenal. I went through the records month by month, my finger tracing the familiar patterns. The first Sunday of every month, like clockwork, a cash withdrawal. $100. Sometimes a little more if there was a special collection. I'd mark it in my ledger with a simple, consistent notation. Tithe. 4 years, it was a steady, unbroken rhythm of devotion. Then I focused on the last year, the period since my name had vanished from the church bulletin. The withdrawals were still there every single month. $100. Sometimes $120. I had given Tristan the cash in its pristine white envelope, every single time. My end of the covenant had been upheld. Now I needed to prove that his had been broken. The challenge was immense. How could I, an ordinary church member, prove that the cash I gave my son, the deacon, never made it into the church's coffers? It was my word against his. He would claim he'd passed it on, that the church's own bookkeeping was perhaps a little disorganized. He would wrap himself in the cloak of his office, his piety, and I would be dismissed as a confused, vindictive old woman. I needed more. I needed to show not just my giving but his spending. This was the hardest part. It felt like a terrible, invasive violation of my son's privacy, even though he had so brutally violated my trust and dignity. But my resolve, forged in the fire of his public humiliation of me, did not waver. I thought of the way the congregation had looked at me, their eyes full of pity and suspicion. I thought of Tristan, using God's pulpit to weave his web of lies. And I knew I had to press on. Tristan and I for years had shared a joint savings account. It was something we'd set up after Thomas passed, a small emergency fund in case anything happened to me, with him as a co-signer so he could access it if needed. We hadn't used it in years, but it was still active. I knew he had a debit card linked to it. I had never monitored it, trusting him implicitly. That trust was now dead. With a heavy heart, I requested the statements for that account for the past year. When they arrived in a thick manila envelope, I opened them with trembling hands. What I found made me feel sick to my stomach. The account, which should have been dormant, was a flurry of activity. Small then increasingly large withdrawals. Debit card purchases from places I had never been. Expensive restaurants downtown. High-end clothing stores. Online charges from sites I didn't recognize. And most damningly, a series of regular late-night cash withdrawals from ATMs located suspiciously close to the city's most notorious casinos. He was gambling. My son, Deacon Ambrose, had a gambling problem. And he was funding it with money he was likely borrowing from other sources he was now struggling to repay. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. His expensive new lifestyle, his constant need for loans, his theft of my tithe money, it was all being fed into the voracious, insatiable maw of his addiction. The evidence was circumstantial, yes. I couldn't prove that the exact $100 I gave him each month ended up in a slot machine. But I could prove a pattern. A pattern of him taking money from me under false pretenses. A pattern of him living a life far beyond his legitimate means. A pattern of deceit that directly contradicted his public persona as a devout, humble servant of the church. But even this, I feared, might not be enough. It was still a family matter, he said, she said. I needed something more. Something official. Something that connected my cash directly to the church's empty coffers. This required the bravest step of all. I had to speak to Reverend Solomon Jones. Reverend Jones was a good man, a man of deep faith and integrity. But he was also Tristan's mentor. He had championed Tristan's rise through the church leadership, had beamed with pride at his ordination as a deacon. To approach him with such a monstrous accusation against his star protege felt like an act of betrayal against the very structure of our church community. I rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my mind. I couldn't go in with just accusations and emotions. I had to present my case like a lawyer, like the lawyers Tristan so admired. With facts. With evidence. I compiled a neat, simple folder. On one side, my own bank statements with the monthly tithe withdrawals highlighted. On the other, the statements from our joint account, showing Tristan's suspicious, profligate spending. I also included a few of the old church bulletins from years past, showing my name on the donation lists, and then a stack of the recent ones showing its conspicuous absence. It was a quiet, damning narrative told in numbers and dates. The day I finally called the church office to request a private, urgent meeting with Reverend Jones, my heart was in my throat. Sister Ambrose, his kind secretary said, of course. Is everything all right? I just need some spiritual guidance, Martha, I replied, the lie a small necessary sin. On a very difficult matter. The appointment was set for the following afternoon. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the folder on my kitchen table. My case was prepared. I was about to accuse my own son, a deacon of the church, of being a liar and a thief to his own pastor. It was a step from which there would be no return. My quiet investigation was over. The battle for the truth was about to begin. The walk to the New Hope AME Zion Church for my meeting with Reverend Jones felt like walking to my own execution. The familiar, comforting facade of the old stone building, a place that had been my sanctuary for over 50 years, now seemed imposing, judgmental. The lies Tristan had told from that pulpit had poisoned this space for me, transforming it from a haven of peace into the scene of my deepest humiliation. My hands, clutching the manila folder containing my carefully compiled evidence, were cold and clammy despite the warm afternoon sun. Reverend Jones's study was a quiet, book-lined room, filled with the scent of old paper and lemon polish. He greeted me with his usual warmth, his kind eyes full of concern. Sister Cecilia, he said, his deep voice a gentle rumble, it is good to see you. But you look troubled, my dear. Please tell me what is weighing so heavily on your heart. I sat opposite him at his large, cluttered desk, my folder on my lap. For a moment the words wouldn't come. The shame of it all, the profound sorrow of what I was about to do, accuse my own son, his prized deacon, threatened to overwhelm me. I thought of Tristan as a little boy in the front pew, his eyes wide with wonder during the Christmas pageant. Then I remembered his cold, hard gaze as he had called me a lapsed sinner, and my resolve returned. Reverend Jones, I began, my voice a little shaky at first but gaining strength with each word, I am here today not just with a heavy heart, but with a deeply troubled spirit. I need your wisdom and I need your help. This is about Tristan. His expression became more serious, his attention absolute. He simply nodded for me to continue. I laid it all out. I spoke of my long-standing practice of giving Tristan my monthly cash tithe to deliver to the church. I showed him my bank statements, my meticulously highlighted withdrawals. I showed him the old church bulletins where my small donations to the building fund were regularly acknowledged, and then the stack of recent ones where my name was conspicuously absent. For months, Reverend, I explained, I told myself it was a simple oversight, a secretarial error. I did not want to believe anything else. But other things, they did not add up. My voice trembling slightly, I then presented him with the statements from the joint savings account, the one showing Tristan's increasingly frantic and extravagant spending, the ATM withdrawals near casinos, the purchases at high-end stores I knew he couldn't afford on his salary. He has been asking me for more and more money, what he calls loans, I continued. He seems to be in some kind of trouble. So, a few Sundays ago I gently, privately, asked him if he was certain my tithes were reaching the church, thinking perhaps he had forgotten. I paused, the memory of that Sunday a fresh, searing pain. The next day from the pulpit he delivered a testimony about lapsed sinners, about elders whose hearts have hardened. He looked at me, Reverend. He shamed me in front of our entire church family, the family I have loved and served my entire adult life. He did it, I believe, to silence me, to discredit me before I could uncover the truth. Reverend Jones sat in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He picked up my bank statements, then the ones from the joint account, his gaze moving between the two, connecting the dots. He looked at the old, cheerful bulletins, then at the new, silent ones. The evidence, though circumstantial, painted a devastatingly clear picture. Sister Cecilia, he said finally, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher, anger perhaps and a deep, profound sadness. What you are suggesting is a betrayal of the highest order. Not just against you, his mother, but against this church, against God himself. He looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful empathy. And for him to use the pulpit, our sacred space, as a tool for his own deception, to humiliate you, that is an abomination. He stood and walked to the window, his back to me, looking out at the church garden for a long silent moment. I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting for his judgment. Had I done the right thing? Would he believe me? Or would he protect his star deacon, his protege? Finally he turned back to me, his face set like stone, the gentle pastor replaced by a righteous, determined leader. Cecilia, he said, his voice now firm, resolute. I cannot thank you enough for your courage in bringing this to me. It must have been an agonizing decision. Your faith and your integrity are a testament to this church, and I have failed to protect you within its walls. That ends today. He explained his plan. I will conduct a discreet but thorough internal investigation. I, along with the head of our church council, Brother Henderson, will review the church's financial records for the past 2 years. We will look for any record of your cash donations. This will be handled quietly, to avoid any undue scandal until we have all the facts. He paused. And then I will confront Deacon Ambrose with our findings. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me weep washed over me. He believed me. He was going to act. What will happen to him? I whispered, the mother in me still aching for the son he should have been. Reverend Jones looked at me, his eyes full of a sorrowful wisdom. That, Sister Cecilia, will depend on his reaction to the truth. It will depend on whether he chooses the path of repentance, or continues down the path of deceit. But either way there will be accountability. I promise you that. As I left his study he took both my hands in his. You are a strong woman, Cecilia Ambrose, he said. Your faith has been tested by fire and it has not been found wanting. Now let the church carry this burden for you. Let us find the truth. Walking home, the late afternoon sun felt warmer on my face. The weight on my soul hadn't vanished, but it felt lighter, shared. I had placed my truth, my evidence, into the hands of a just and righteous man. The trap was no longer mine to spring. I had done my part. Now all I could do was pray and wait for my son, Deacon Tristan Ambrose, to face the final, unavoidable reckoning with the one authority he could not deceive, the truth itself. The week following my meeting with Reverend Jones was the quietest, most agonizing of my life. The house felt like a tomb, each tick of the old mantle clock marking a slow, deliberate step towards a future I couldn't yet imagine. I didn't hear from Tristan. I didn't hear from the Reverend. I was adrift in a sea of silent anticipation, my prayers a constant, whispered plea for strength, for wisdom, for a resolution that would bring peace however painful. Then on Saturday evening Reverend Jones called me. His voice was grave, weary. "Cecilia," he said, "the review is complete. As you suspected, there are no records of any of your cash tithe donations for the past 14 months. He paused and I heard him sigh heavily. I confronted Deacon Ambrose with our findings this afternoon. I confronted him with the church's empty ledger, and with the other financial documents you so bravely provided. And I whispered, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He broke down, Cecilia, the Reverend said, his voice full of a deep pastoral sorrow. Completely. He confessed to everything. The theft, the lies, the gambling debts that drove him to it. He confessed his shame, his arrogance, and the terrible, cruel thing he did to you from the pulpit to try and silence you. A wave of emotion so complex it had no name washed over me. There was no triumph, no vindictive joy. Only a profound, aching sadness for my lost son, and a small, quiet, grim sense of vindication. The truth was out. There must be consequences, Cecilia, Reverend Jones continued, his voice firming. For his sins against you and against this church. Tristan has agreed to the terms I have set for his atonement. He will be stepping down as a deacon, effective immediately. He will enter a formal treatment program for his gambling addiction. And, he took a deep breath, he has agreed to make a full public confession and apology to you, and to the entire congregation during tomorrow's service. My breath caught. A public confession. In front of everyone. Reverend, I began, are you sure that is necessary? The shame. It is absolutely necessary, he said, his voice unyielding but kind. Your name was tarnished in this house of God, Sister Ambrose. It must be cleansed in this house of God. His sin was public. His repentance must also be public. It is the only way for true healing to begin for him, for you, and for our church family. I knew he was right. That Sunday I walked into the New Hope AME Zion Church with my head held high, my steps slow but steady. The usual pre-service chatter quieted as I entered. I could feel the eyes of the congregation on me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and lingering uncertainty. I took my usual seat in the third pew and stared straight ahead at the simple wooden cross on the altar, my heart a tumultuous sea of prayer. When the time came for the deacon's announcements, it was not Tristan, but Reverend Jones who approached the pulpit. His face was grave. Brothers and sisters, he began, his voice resonating with authority, before our service begins, we must attend to a serious matter of truth and repentance within our own leadership. He then called Tristan Ambrose to the pulpit. My son. He looked like a stranger, his usual charismatic confidence gone, replaced by a pale, ashen mask of shame. He was dressed not in his usual deacon's vestments, but in a simple, somber suit. He clutched the sides of the pulpit, his hands trembling. He couldn't look at the congregation. He couldn't look at me. His confession when it came was a raw, broken thing, his voice choked with sobs. He confessed to stealing from me, his own mother. He confessed to lying, to harboring a secret gambling addiction that had poisoned his soul. And then, his voice dropping to a near whisper, he confessed his most grievous sin. And I, in my arrogance and my shame, he wept, his body shaking, I stood in this sacred place and I bore false witness against my own mother, Sister Cecilia Ambrose, a woman of unshakable faith whose only sin was to love me. I called her a sinner to cover my own sins. I ask for her forgiveness though I know I do not deserve it. And I ask for the forgiveness of this church and of God. A wave of shocked gasps and murmurs swept through the sanctuary. I could see my friends, my fellow church mothers, their faces a mixture of horror at his confession and dawning, furious understanding on my behalf. I did not weep. I sat there, my back straight, and looked at the broken man at the pulpit, my son. The humiliation he had inflicted upon me was now his own, magnified 100-fold. There was no satisfaction in it, only a deep, profound tragedy. After the service, after Tristan had been formally stripped of his duties as a deacon and had left with his weeping wife, a stream of people came to me. They hugged me, they apologized for their doubt, they offered their love and support. My name was cleared. My dignity was restored. I walked home alone, the afternoon sun warming my face. My faith, which had been so grievously tested, felt different now. Quieter, perhaps, but stronger, forged in the fire of betrayal and vindicated by the painful, necessary truth. The journey ahead for Tristan would be long and arduous, and I didn't know if our relationship could ever truly be mended. The sorrow for the son I had lost would likely be a companion for the rest of my days. But as I put the key in my door, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a peace that was both somber and absolute. Justice in its own way had been served. My faith was intact. And my truth, the quiet, resilient truth of a mother's love and a righteous heart, had in the end been made manifest in the very house of the Lord.